In the glittering ballrooms of 1950s New York, while other socialites played the part of elegant swans, one woman chose to be an entire orchestra. Her name was Hope Hampton, and she was a walking, talking spectacle. A former silent film star and the fabulously wealthy widow of a movie mogul, she became the undisputed queen of Park Avenue by turning every public appearance into a grand theatrical performance. But as Truman Capote brilliantly observed, Hope lived like the third act of an opera. Everything was so over the top, no one could hear the words. Her life was a magnificent show of color, jewels, and furs, so dazzling that it was impossible to look away. Yet it was also a performance so loud that it drowned out the truth of the woman underneath. This is her story, a deep dive into the human being behind the spectacular public persona, a quest to understand if her opera was a shield for a scandalous past or the ultimate purpose of her life. Before Hope Hampton could become the queen of Park Avenue, another woman, May Hampton, had to be born, and her destiny would be forged in the chaotic, flickering dawn of a new American art form, the motion picture. To understand the immense power of the man who would invent Hope Hampton, you must first understand the world he commanded. The early American film industry was not the slick corporate machine of modern Hollywood. It was a raw, boisterous, and often cutthroat business, born in dusty Nickelodeons and run by visionary, iron-willed impresarios who were inventing the rules as they went along. In the first decade of the 20th century, movies were a novelty, short, flickering vignettes shown in storefront theaters for a nickel. But the men who controlled the industry, figures like Adolf Zukor, Carl Laemmle, and Louis B. Mayer, saw something much bigger. They dreamed of turning this working-class diversion into a legitimate, mainstream art form. They began building the first movie palaces, opulent cathedrals of fantasy that rivaled the grandest opera houses in Europe. The Regent in New York, the Tivoli in Chicago. These were temples where ordinary people could pay a quarter to be transported into a world of glamour, adventure, and romance. This transformation created a voracious, insatiable demand for new films, and therefore for the one physical commodity that made it all possible: raw, unexposed celluloid film. And in this world, one man held the keys to the kingdom. His name was Jules Brulatour. Born in New Orleans to French-Canadian parents, Brulatour was not a filmmaker, but he was the ultimate film mogul. He was a brilliant, sharp-eyed businessman who early in his career had worked as an agent for the Lumiere brothers, the French inventors of the cinematograph. He saw the future, and he knew it was in America. With visionary foresight, he forged an exclusive, ironclad partnership with the most important photographic inventor in the world, George Eastman of the Eastman Kodak Company. The deal was simple and world-changing. Brulatour would be the sole distributor of Eastman Kodak film stock to the entire American motion picture industry. The power this gave him was absolute. If you were a fledgling producer, a director with a dream, or even an established studio, and you wanted to make a movie, you had to go to Jules Brulatour. He controlled the spigot. He could nurture a young production company by extending them credit on their film stock, or he could crush a rival by simply cutting off their supply. He was the silent partner in almost every movie made. This strategic monopoly made him colossally, fantastically wealthy. He used his immense profits to invest directly in the industry he supplied, becoming a co-founder of Universal Pictures in 1912, and later establishing his own production and film processing laboratories. He was a tough, shrewd, and often ruthless operator, but he was also a man of sophisticated tastes. He maintained lavish homes in New York and France, collected art, and, like many powerful men of his era, had a particular appreciation for beautiful young women, especially those with dreams of stardom. He was a kingmaker, a man who not only supplied the canvas for America's dreams, but also had the power to choose whose faces would be painted upon it. Alongside the rise of the moguls came the invention of the movie star. Before the 1910s, actors in films were anonymous, but audiences began to clamor for their favorites, and producers realized that a popular face could sell tickets more effectively than any story. The star system was born. This was a process of industrial-scale myth-making. Young women, often from modest backgrounds, were discovered, given new, more glamorous names, a fabricated backstory, and then promoted relentlessly through the new medium of the movie magazine. Their lives, both on and off screen, became a subject of intense public fascination. The greatest talent scout and beauty connoisseur of this era was the Broadway impresario Florin Ziegfeld, whose Ziegfeld Follies was the ultimate showcase of American beauty. Ziegfeld and his art director, Ben Ali Hagen, had a genius for turning beautiful girls into goddesses, draping them in feathers and jewels, and presenting them to the world as paragons of glamour. This was the world that May Hampton of Texas would enter, a world where beauty was a tangible asset, where identity was malleable, and where a powerful male patron could transform a pretty girl into an icon. The New York City where a newly christened Hope Hampton arrived in the late 1910s was a city on the verge of a glorious nervous breakdown. The trauma of the Great War had given way to a decade of unprecedented prosperity and frenetic, almost hysterical energy. This was the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age, a time when the entire social and cultural landscape of America was being redrawn. The engine of this transformation was money. A booming stock market was creating a new class of millionaires overnight, and their new money was crashing against the staid, formidable walls of New York's old money society. The established Knickerbocker families, the Astors, the Golets, the Rhinelanders, who traced their lineage back to the city's Dutch founders, suddenly found their dominance challenged by brash stockbrokers, ambitious industrialists, and the newly respectable and wealthy titans of the entertainment world. The lines were blurring. It was a time of immense social mobility and anxiety, where a new, more chaotic hierarchy was being forged in the city's ballrooms and speakeasies. The 18th Amendment and Prohibition, which went into effect in 1920, was meant to usher in an era of sober morality. Instead, it did the exact opposite. It drove drinking underground and gave birth to the speakeasy, the secret, illicit nightclub that became the defining social institution of the age. In thousands of hidden bars across the city, New Yorkers from all walks of life mingled in a democratic haze of illegal gin, cigarette smoke, and the revolutionary sound of jazz. This was the soundtrack of the era, a music that was syncopated, improvisational, and unapologetically modern. It was the perfect score for a decade that was breaking all the old rules. This new social freedom was embodied by the new woman, the flapper. With her bobbed hair, her short hemlines, and her shockingly public use of cosmetics, she was a symbol of female liberation. She smoked, she drank, she danced the Charleston, and she demanded a level of personal and economic freedom that would have been unthinkable to her mother's generation. Hope Hampton, with her beauty and ambition, was a perfect embodiment of this new, modern feminine ideal. But the most crucial development for Hope's future fame was the birth of the modern tabloid newspaper. This was the golden age of sensationalist journalism, a circulation war fought between press barons like Joseph Medill Patterson of the New York Daily News and the eccentric physical culturist Bernard McFadden of the New York Evening Graphic. These papers, with their bold headlines, dramatic photographs, and breathless prose, catered to a mass audience hungry for stories of sex, crime, and scandal. They understood that the private lives of the rich and famous were a commodity that could sell millions of newspapers. The graphic became infamous for its composographs, ghoulish, fabricated photographs that reenacted famous crimes or scandals using posed actors and pasted-on heads. These tabloids created a new kind of celebrity culture, one where notoriety was not just a byproduct of fame, but a pathway to achieving it. To be caught in a scandalous love triangle, a messy divorce, or a mysterious crime was no longer a career ender. It was a front-page story that could make you a household name overnight. The private dramas of the elite were now public entertainment. It was this ravenous, scandal-hungry media machine that would seize upon the story of a powerful mogul, his unstable wife, and a beautiful young actress, turning a private tragedy into a public sensation and launching the career of the woman who now called herself Hope. Her story begins not under the bright lights of a movie set, but in the humid turn-of-the-century sprawl of Houston, Texas. She was born May Elizabeth Hampton in 1897 to Robert Hampton, a traveling salesman, and his wife Elizabeth. Hers was a respectable middle-class existence, a life of church socials and front porch swings, circumscribed by the modest possibilities available to a girl from the provinces. Later in life, when she had fully inhabited her grand persona, she would sometimes embellish her origins, hinting at a more aristocratic Southern background. The truth was far more ordinary, and for a girl with an extraordinary imagination and a burning ambition, ordinary was a kind of prison. The Hampton family later moved to Philadelphia, a city that brought them closer to the cultural orbit of New York. But May's defining feature was a beauty that seemed destined for a larger stage. It was a classic, wholesome American beauty. Large, expressive eyes, a perfect Cupid's bow mouth, and a figure that was celebrated in an era that admired curves. She quickly discovered that this beauty was a powerful, tangible asset. In the 1910s, one of the few socially acceptable ways for a young woman to capitalize on her looks was the beauty pageant. These contests, which were exploding in popularity across America, were not just frivolous parades. They were potent launching pads, offering prize money, public recognition, and, most importantly, the attention of men in the entertainment industry. May entered and won a series of these competitions, her victories growing in prestige until she was crowned Miss Galveston, a notable title in her home state. Each victory was a confirmation, a piece of evidence that her dream of a grander life was not just a girlish fantasy. The pageants gave her confidence and a portfolio of professional photographs, which she saw as her passport out of a conventional life of marriage and domesticity. With the unshakable self-belief that would become her trademark, she made the momentous decision to leave her family and seek her fortune in New York. Upon her arrival, she understood instinctively that May Hampton was the name of the girl she was leaving behind. To succeed in this new world, she needed a new identity, a name that carried the weight of her aspirations. She chose Hope. It was a brilliant act of self-creation. The name was at once a prayer, a declaration of intent, and a perfect poetic stage name. May was the girl from Texas. Hope was the future star. Her beauty was her letter of introduction, and it quickly brought her to the attention of the city's artistic elite. She began modeling and was taken under the wing of Ben Ali Hagen, a celebrated society portraitist and a key creative force in the Ziegfeld Follies. Hagen was a master of aesthetics, a man whose approval could make a woman a star. He specialized in creating living tableaus for the Follies, posing the most beautiful women in the world as classical goddesses and historical figures. To be one of Hagen's tableau beauties was to be recognized as a pinnacle of feminine perfection. While Hope was never a Ziegfeld girl in the traditional sense, she was an integral part of this world. Hagen photographed her, promoted her, and taught her the crucial art of being looked at. In this circle, she learned that beauty was not passive. It was an instrument to be wielded with intelligence and purpose. She learned how to pose, how to wear clothes, and how to command a room without saying a word. It was in this heady, sophisticated environment, a world of powerful men and professionally beautiful women, that the inevitable happened. She was introduced to the king of this universe, Jules Brulatour. The moment was a perfect storm of ambition and opportunity. On one side was the powerful middle-aged mogul, a man who had everything but youth and was captivated by her fresh, vibrant beauty. On the other was the young, ambitious starlet, a woman who had the beauty but needed the power and the platform that only a man like him could provide. Their connection was immediate, a spark that would ignite a passionate affair, a legendary fortune, and a scandal that would make Hope Hampton a star before she had ever delivered a single line on film. The girl from Texas had found her stage and her Svengali. The first act of her opera was about to begin with the crack of a pistol. Jules Brulatour was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, and what he wanted in the autumn of 1922 was the beautiful young actress named Hope Hampton. But he was not a man with a clean slate. He was still legally and socially tied to his second wife, Dorothy Gibson, a woman whose name, like her husband's, was also etched into the dramatic history of the early 20th century. Dorothy was a successful actress and model in her own right, but she would forever be remembered for the harrowing event that had made her a star. She was a survivor of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The trauma of that night, compounded by a history of emotional instability and a growing awareness of her husband's constant infidelities, had left her a volatile, unpredictable figure. The marriage of Dorothy and Jules was a cold, bitter affair, kept together only by a thin veneer of social respectability and the constant presence of money. Hope's undeniable public relationship with the film mogul was the final devastating weight that would cause the entire structure of their lives to collapse. The public spectacle began in the pre-dawn hours of November 27, 1922, and it was a moment of shocking, sensational drama that was immediately splashed across the front pages of every tabloid in the country. The story, as it was initially delivered to the New York City police, was an amateur work of fiction. A maid had called the precinct, hysterically reporting a burglary and a shooting in the luxurious Park Avenue apartment of the Brulatour. When the police arrived on the scene, they found a scene of chaos and violence. Dorothy Brulatour was found with a gunshot wound in her arm, and Jules Brulatour had a deep, bloody gash on his head. The story they spun for the authorities was that a burglar had broken in, and in a struggle a pistol had gone off, wounding Dorothy, and the burglar had then struck Jules over the head before making his escape. But the police, veterans of the gritty realities of New York, quickly recognized the tale for the desperate invention it was. The evidence simply didn't add up. There was no sign of a forced entry, and the only items missing from the apartment were a few trinkets, which a search of the building later revealed had been hastily thrown out a window. It was not a burglary at all. The story soon unraveled, giving way to a new, equally flimsy narrative. Jules claimed that he had been cleaning a pistol when it had accidentally discharged, wounding Dorothy. He had then, in a moment of panic, stumbled and struck his head on a cabinet. This story, too, was quickly dismissed as implausible. The truth, as it would eventually emerge in the lurid headlines of the city's newspapers, was far more sordid and far more human. Dorothy had found out about her husband's affair with Hope Hampton, and, in a fit of jealous rage, she had confronted him, demanding a divorce and threatening to expose their relationship. In the ensuing struggle, a gun was produced. It was never definitively proven who had been holding it, and fired. The wound to Dorothy's arm, though painful, was not life-threatening, but the violence of the incident was a devastating indictment of their marriage. The private drama was now a public spectacle, and the tabloids, like vultures sensing a feast, descended with a gleeful ferocity. The scandal was the perfect story for the tabloid age. It had everything: immense wealth, a dashing mogul, a volatile, famous wife, and a beautiful, ambitious mistress. The New York Evening Graphic ran headlines that screamed of the scandal, using its infamous composographs to create dramatic, semi-fictionalized photographs that put readers right in the middle of the crime scene. Hope Hampton's name was now a household word, a byword for a kind of scandalous modern ambition. She was the other woman, and her reputation was forged in the fire of this public controversy. In the ensuing divorce trial, Dorothy Gibson formally named Hope Hampton as the co-respondent. The proceedings became a media circus, with lurid testimony about Brulatour's lavish gifts to Hope, their secret rendezvous, and the passionate nature of their affair. For a woman of her era, such a scandal would have been a social death sentence. Hope, in her early 20s, was publicly cast as a homewrecker, a social climber who had used her youth and beauty to destroy a marriage and ensnare one of the most powerful men in the country. But Hope Hampton was not like other women. With the unwavering and immensely powerful backing of Jules Brulatour, she weathered the storm. The trial, rather than destroying her, made her a celebrity. She was now a name known from coast to coast, and that in the burgeoning world of movie fame was the ultimate prize. Just weeks after his divorce was finalized, Jules Brulatour married Hope Hampton. It was a clear, defiant statement to the world. He was 53 and she was 26. The scandal that had threatened to ruin her had instead given her a title, a husband, and a financial platform that would enable her to pursue her dreams on a scale that few could have ever imagined. The girl from Texas was now a New York celebrity, forged in controversy and armed with the immense power of her new husband. The stage was now set for the next act of her life, and she would play it not in the pages of a newspaper, but on the silver screen. With the scandal behind them and their marriage now official, Jules Brulatour turned his considerable business acumen and immense wealth to a singular overriding purpose: making his new wife a star. He was not merely a passive financier. He was a force of nature who would personally produce and bankroll her films, leaving no stone unturned in the relentless promotion of his beloved Hope. He established his own production company, Hope Hampton Productions, for the sole purpose of creating vehicles designed to showcase his wife's beauty and charisma. This was not a venture based on pure commercial logic. It was a passion project, a multi-million-dollar act of devotion. Her silent film career, which lasted from the early to mid-1920s, was a masterclass in this kind of manufactured stardom. Her films were not just movies, they were extensions of her public persona, blurring the line between the character on the screen and the star in the headlines. Her breakthrough role in the 1923 film A Modern Salome was a brilliant piece of marketing. The title was a direct wink to the public, a nod to her scandalous, seductive reputation. The film itself was a lavish, opulent spectacle with extravagant sets and costumes designed to highlight her famous beauty. Hope played a woman who uses her allure to navigate a dangerous, worldly society, a role that was perfectly suited to the public's perception of her. The film was less a complex character study and more a glorious, moving portrait of its star. Throughout the decade, she starred in a string of similar productions, each a display of grand style and a showcase for her growing collection of jewels and furs. She starred in films like The Gold Diggers, 1923, a popular comedy about beautiful chorus girls looking for a rich husband, a theme that would have resonated with her real-life story. She also appeared in the 1924 drama The Price of a Party, which further cemented her public image as a glamorous woman of the world. The promotional push for her films was relentless. Brulatour ensured that his wife's face was everywhere, in movie magazines, newspapers, and on billboards across the country. He personally oversaw every aspect of her career, from the costumes she wore to the directors who shot her scenes. She was a star, but she was a star on his terms, in his universe. But was she a great actress? This is the central question that hangs over her silent film career. Contemporary reviews from the time provide a fascinating, contradictory answer. Critics consistently and unanimously praised her stunning physical beauty, her poise, and the incredible lavishness of her productions. They would rave about her gowns and the sparkle of her jewels on screen, but when it came to her actual dramatic talent, the reviews were often lukewarm, polite, and cautious. Her performances were frequently described as beautiful but emotionally distant, posed rather than felt. The emotion, if any, was in her extravagant gestures and her perfectly framed close-ups, not in the depth of her character. She was a magnificent presence, a perfect subject for the camera, but she rarely seemed to disappear into the part. The person on the screen always seemed to be Hope Hampton, the beautiful, glamorous wife of Jules Brulatour. In hindsight, it's clear that her fame was a meticulously constructed phenomenon, a product of Brulatour's immense financial backing and her own innate talent for self-promotion. She was not just an actress, she was a celebrity, and in the nascent celebrity culture of the 1920s, the latter was often more valuable than the former. Her public life, full of scandal and splendor, was a far more compelling narrative than any of her film plots. The real drama was happening off-screen. Her career was a testament to Jules Brulatour's power and her own genius for being unforgettable. But the foundation of her stardom was built on a silent medium, and an incoming revolution was about to destroy the entire structure. The year 1927 would change the American film industry forever. On October 6th, Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer starring Al Jolson, and the world heard an actor speak on screen for the very first time. The arrival of the talkies was not a gradual evolution. It was a sudden, devastating earthquake that shattered the careers of countless silent film stars overnight. The reasons for this were manifold. Many actors, famous for their silent charisma, possessed voices that were either too high-pitched, too flat, or burdened with thick regional accents that were jarring to the public ear. Others simply lacked the theatrical training to deliver spoken dialogue convincingly, their exaggerated pantomimic acting style seeming ridiculously melodramatic on a soundstage. For Hope Hampton, a star whose appeal was almost entirely visual, the coming of sound was a death knell for her film career. Her theatrical gestures and posed unnaturalistic expressions did not translate to the new, more intimate and realistic demands of sound film. Her career, so carefully and expensively manufactured, came to an abrupt, unceremonious end. She would make only one more film, the 1929 silent to sound transition the man with the movie camera. But it was a fleeting effort that did not succeed. But if there was one thing that defined Hope Hampton, it was her unshakable refusal to be defeated. She was not a woman to simply fade away. If her face could no longer be the sole instrument of her fame, she would find a new one. Her voice, instead of admitting defeat, she made a bold, almost audacious pivot. If Hollywood would no longer have her, she would conquer a more demanding and respected stage, the world of opera. With Jules Brulatour's continued financial support, she embarked on this new career with the same relentless determination she had applied to her first. She moved to Paris, the undisputed capital of classical music, to study with the best vocal coaches in the world, including the famed soprano and vocal teacher Mary Garden. For several years, she dedicated herself to the rigorous, all-consuming discipline of classical vocal training. This was not a mere whim or a flight of fancy. This was a serious, all-in effort to reinvent herself, to find a new stage upon which to perform. She was putting in the hours, the practice, and the dedication required of a true artist. She would debut in 1928 in the title role of Jules Massenet's Manon in a production in Philadelphia. It was a high-profile event, heavily promoted and attended by society figures and critics, all curious to see if the silent screen beauty could actually sing. The verdict, much like the reviews of her film career, was mixed but generally respectful. Critics acknowledged the surprising quality of her lyric soprano voice and praised her hard work and dedication. But there was a persistent sense that while the technical proficiency was there, the raw emotional power of a transcendent star was missing. She was good, but she was not great. She continued to pursue her operatic ambitions for several years, performing with smaller companies in America and Europe. Her performances were always grand social events, opportunities for her to wear magnificent gowns and jewels, as much a part of the spectacle as the opera itself. But she never broke through to the top tier of the opera world. The Metropolitan Opera would never have her as a leading lady. Her operatic career, while not a resounding success, was a remarkable testament to her incredible resilience and her desperate, unyielding need for a stage. When one platform was taken from her, she simply found another, and with the eventual death of her beloved husband, she would find the third and final stage upon which she would perform her greatest and most enduring role. The end of Hope Hampton's silent film career was not a gentle fading out, but a sudden brutal slamming of a door. The arrival of sound had rendered her particular brand of visual pantomimic stardom obsolete. Yet her pivot to the world of opera was a testament to her ferocious, almost pathological refusal to be silenced. Throughout the 1930s, she pursued this new ambition with a relentless, if not always celebrated, dedication. This was a decade of hard work, a long and often frustrating interlude between the high drama of her scandalous youth and the magnificent spectacle of her later life. Her life as an opera singer was one of constant striving. While she never achieved the pinnacle of success she so desperately craved, a leading role at the Metropolitan Opera or La Scala remained forever out of reach. She was a working, professional soprano. She performed with respected companies like the Philadelphia Grand Opera and toured provincial French opera houses, taking on the great lyric soprano roles of Mimi in La Bohème and the tragic heroine of Madama Butterfly. Her performances were always grand affairs, heavily promoted and attended by a curious mix of high society and genuine music lovers. The press, who had followed her since the Brulatour scandal, continued to document her career with a mixture of respect for her tenacity and a certain condescending fascination. She was always the former film star, Hope Hampton, a novelty act in the serious world of classical music. This period was also the long, settled autumn of her marriage to Jules Brulatour. He remained her greatest champion, funding her expensive vocal training, her custom-made costumes, and the publicity that surrounded her every performance. Their life together was one of unimaginable luxury. They divided their time between their magnificent duplex apartment at 270 Park Avenue, which was filled with French antiques and priceless art, and their sprawling country estate, Hilltop, in Mount Kisco, Connecticut. They were a fixture in international society, entertaining lavishly and being entertained by the elite of New York, London, and Paris. Theirs was a complex partnership, a bond forged in scandal and cemented by 2 decades of shared ambition. He was the powerful, paternalistic figure who had created her, and she was his most dazzling creation, the living embodiment of his wealth and influence. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 brought a temporary halt to this gilded life. The grand social season was muted, transatlantic travel became impossible, and the nation's focus shifted to the grim realities of the global conflict. For Hope, it was a time of relative quiet, a forced intermission in the performance of her life. She dedicated herself to war bond tours and entertaining troops, using her celebrity for the patriotic cause. But the most profound change was yet to come. In the autumn of 1946, Jules Brulatour, the titan of the film industry, the man who had been the architect of her entire adult life, died at the age of 76. His death was the end of an era. For Hope, now 49 years old, it was a moment of terrifying finality and exhilarating possibility. She was a widow, alone for the first time since she was a young woman. The man who had controlled her career, her finances, and her public image was gone, but he had left her with the tools for a spectacular reinvention, a colossal fortune, a legendary collection of jewels, and a name that everyone in New York knew. The long interlude was over. The curtain was about to rise on her third and greatest act. The woman who emerged from the mourning period for Jules Brulatour was not a quiet, retiring widow. She was a woman reborn, armed with an immense fortune and an unquenchable thirst for the spotlight. She inherited the vast Brulatour estate, including the Park Avenue mansion, valuable real estate, and a portfolio of stocks that made her independently, fabulously wealthy. But her greatest inheritance, the asset that would become the foundation of her new career, was the legendary Brulatour jewelry collection. It was a treasure trove of enormous diamonds, Colombian emeralds, Burmese rubies, and ropes of perfect pearls, a glittering arsenal for the social conquest she was about to undertake. The stage for this conquest was the New York of the late 1940s and 1950s. The city, triumphant after the war, was entering a new golden age of glamour and prosperity. At the apex of this world was a high society more codified and more competitive than ever before. This was the era of the Great Society columnist, powerful figures like Elsa Maxwell and Walter Winchell, whose words could make or break a reputation overnight. It was the era of legendary night spots like the Stork Club and El Morocco, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. And it was, above all, the era of the Grand Charity Ball, the ultimate arena for social display. Hope Hampton, a new money widow with a scandalous past and a failed career in the arts, understood that she could not compete in this world on its own terms. She lacked the impeccable lineage of the Astors, the effortless chic of Babe Paley, or the intellectual credibility of the city's artistic patrons. To try and imitate the quiet, understated elegance of Capote's swans would have been to invite unflattering comparisons and certain defeat. So she devised a new strategy, a brilliant and audacious plan to carve out her own unique, unassailable niche. If she could not be the queen of good taste, she would become the Empress of Spectacle. Her method was simple. She would be the most talked about woman at every party she attended. She would be utterly, magnificently unignorable. Her primary weapon in this campaign was her wardrobe. She turned the act of getting dressed into a form of theatrical production. She cultivated relationships with designers who understood her vision, couturiers like Mame Boucher and Valentina, who were willing to create gowns that were less like clothes and more like costumes. Her signature was a fearless, almost shocking use of color. In a world where the sophisticated woman's uniform was often a little black dress, Hope would make her entrance in a blaze of cyclamen pink, canary yellow, or emerald green. Her outfits were often monochromatic, a head-to-toe immersion in a single vibrant hue, a tactic that ensured she would stand out in any crowded ballroom like a rare, exotic bird. Her second weapon was her jewelry. She wore the Brulatour diamonds not with tasteful restraint, but with a joyful, almost reckless abundance. She would pile on enormous necklaces, brooches the size of a fist, ropes of pearls, and glittering tiaras, often all at once. The jewels were not mere accessories. They were her armor, a glittering declaration of her wealth and status, a defiant sparkle against the darkness of obscurity. She would complete these ensembles with a third element, fur. Her collection of chinchilla, ermine, and sable coats and stoles was legendary, and she wore them with a theatrical flair, often trailing them behind her like a royal train. She was not just getting dressed for a party, she was creating a character, and that character was the dazzling, indomitable Hope Hampton. With her strategy in place and her arsenal of couture and jewels assembled, Hope Hampton began her reign. Her genius was in understanding that her performance began long before she ever arrived at an event. The anticipation was part of the show. Her greatest stage was the opening night of the Metropolitan Opera season, the most important evening on the New York social calendar. It was a night of high music and even higher social drama. But for Hope, the opera itself was merely the backdrop for her own performance. She became famous, or rather infamous, for never ever being on time. While the rest of society would be dutifully in their seats for the overture, Hope's box would remain conspicuously empty. Then, sometime in the middle of the first act, when the drama on stage was at its peak, the doors at the back of the orchestra would swing open. A ripple of whispers would pass through the audience, heads would turn, and 1,000 pairs of opera glasses would shift their focus from the stage to the aisle. And there she would be. The entrance was a masterpiece of calculated disruption. She would stand for a moment, silhouetted in the doorway, allowing the audience to take in the full glory of her ensemble, the impossible color of her gown, the blinding sparkle of her diamonds. Then she would begin her slow, majestic sweep down the center aisle to her front row seat, a serene smile on her face, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she had just brought the opera to a grinding halt. She was not merely attending the performance, she was starring in it. The charity balls were her other great arena. She would spend months planning her look for major events like the April in Paris Ball. One year, when the theme was purple, she arrived in a gown of violet satin, wearing a legendary amethyst necklace that had once belonged to a Russian Grand Duchess, with her hair, according to the breathless reports of the Society columnists, tinted a faint shade of lavender. She was not just adhering to the theme, she was embodying it, consuming it, and making it her own. The Society press, at first bemused, quickly became her greatest ally. The photographers adored her because she always gave them a picture that would sell newspapers. The columnists, from the powerful Walter Winchell to the catty Charlie Knickerbocker, chronicled her every move. She was a constant source of good copy. There was the famous night her diamond and ruby necklace broke on the dance floor, sending gems worth a fortune scattering across the parquet as tuxedoed gentlemen scrambled on their hands and knees to retrieve them. There was the costume party where she arrived in character as an Indian princess, atop a live elephant. The stories, whether entirely true or happily embellished, all served to build the legend. But what was the purpose of this relentless, magnificent performance? This is where Truman Capote's observation becomes so piercingly accurate. Hope lived like the third act of an opera. Everything was so over the top, no one could hear the words. The sheer volume of her public persona, the colors, the jewels, the furs, the late entrances, created a wall of glorious, distracting noise. It was a performance so captivating that it discouraged anyone from looking too closely at the performer herself. The spectacle was, in many ways, a brilliant psychological defense mechanism. It was a shield against the past, a way to drown out the lingering whispers of the Brulatour scandal. It was a shield against her own professional insecurities, a grand statement of success that papered over the reality of her failed careers in film and opera. And perhaps most poignantly, it was a shield against the terrifying prospect of invisibility. As a widow, aging in a culture that worshipped youth, she refused to fade away. She refused to become a quiet, dignified relic. Her flamboyant style was a declaration of war against obscurity. It was her way of shouting to the world night after night that she was still here, that she still mattered, that you still had to look at her. Over time, the performance and the person became one. There was no real Hope Hampton hiding underneath the costume. The costume had become her truest self. The spectacle was not a mask. It was her soul made visible. No performance, no matter how brilliant, can last forever. The world that had served as Hope Hampton's stage, the rigidly structured high society New York of the 1950s, began to change dramatically in the late 1960s and 1970s. A new, younger generation forged in the crucible of the counterculture, the Vietnam War, and the fight for civil rights, had little time for the extravagant displays of the old guard. The grand charity ball, once the epicenter of the social world, began to seem like a dated, frivolous relic of a bygone era. The jet set replaced high society, and the locus of glamour shifted from the ballrooms of the Waldorf Astoria to the pulsating democratic dance floor of Studio 54. For Hope Hampton, this cultural shift was the slow, inexorable fading of the stage lights. She was a creature of a specific time and place, and that time was passing. She continued to make her grand entrances, to wear her magnificent jewels and her vibrant couture gowns, but the audience was dwindling. The society columns that had once breathlessly chronicled her every move were being replaced by celebrity gossip that focused on rock stars, movie actors, and Warhol superstars. Her particular brand of theatricality, once seen as high glamour, began to look like high camp. She was becoming an eccentric, a grande dame from a past era, still playing her part with magnificent conviction long after the curtain had fallen. She outlived almost all of her contemporaries. Her husband, her society rivals, the columnists who had made her famous, even the great observer Truman Capote. She saw them all go. She continued to live in her magnificent Park Avenue apartment, a treasure chest of memories and priceless objects, but her world grew smaller and quieter. The invitations to the grand galas became fewer as the galas themselves disappeared. In her final years, she became something of a recluse, a legendary figure rarely seen, and when she was, it was often behind her signature oversized sunglasses, a final shield against a world that no longer saw her in the same way. The woman who had built her life on being seen now seemed to want to disappear. The third act of her opera, which had been played at a constant, deafening forte, was finally reaching its quiet, diminuendo conclusion. Hope Hampton died on January 23, 1982, at the age of 84. Her death was noted in the New York Times with a respectful obituary that recounted the highlights of her varied life. Her legendary jewelry collection was later auctioned at Christie's for a staggering sum, a final glittering epilogue to the spectacular story she had authored. So what was the legacy of Hope Hampton? She was not a great actress or a great singer. Her life's work, her masterpiece, was herself. And if we return one last time to Capote's brilliant observation, perhaps we can finally attempt to hear the words beneath the operatic music. The words were not complex or hidden. The opera itself was the message. The magnificent, loud, unapologetic spectacle of her life was a declaration of survival. The silent film star who lost her medium found a way to never be silent again. The woman whose name was forged in scandal spent the rest of her life creating a narrative so bright that it would banish all shadows. Her life was a testament to the uniquely American art of self-invention, a defiant performance against the dying of the light. She wasn't a quiet swan. She was the entire deafening, unforgettable orchestra, and that in itself is a story worth listening to.